Part 2. John Bell Hood's Blunders, the Tennessee Campaign, Battle of Allatoona Pass. When President Jefferson Davis rode out to review Hood's Army of Tennessee in late September 1864, it was supposed to be a morale booster. Instead, it was a grim parade of weary men, skeptical officers, and a president who looked more like a ghost than a leader. Arthur Manigault, a veteran brigadier, remembered Davis as thin, careworn, and angry, with a scornful expression plastered across his face. He barely tipped his hat as the soldiers saluted. The whole affair felt like a funeral march rather than a rally. One chaplain recalled how a colonel, overcome with enthusiasm, spurred his horse forward and cried out, "3 cheers for our president." The men responded with silence, so deep it could have swallowed the sound whole. The colonel slunk back into line, crestfallen, while Davis rode on as if nothing had happened. It was a scene that perfectly captured the Army's mood, exhausted, skeptical, and utterly unconvinced by their leadership. Behind closed doors, Davis met with Hood's corps commanders, William Hardee, Alexander P. Stewart, and Stephen D. Lee. Hardee asked for a transfer, which Davis granted, sending him to command the Department of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Stewart bluntly suggested Hood should be replaced by either Beauregard or Joseph Johnston. Lee's opinion is lost to history. With Hardee gone, Hood promoted Benjamin F. Cheatham, a Tennessean with a colorful past, Mexican War veteran, gold rush adventurer accused of drunkenness at Stones River, but also a seasoned fighter at Shiloh, Perryville, and Chickamauga. Cheatham now commanded Hardee's corps, a critical piece of Hood's army. Sherman, ever cautious, dispatched divisions to Rome, Georgia, and Chattanooga to guard supply lines. He sent George Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga, to Nashville to protect Tennessee from invasion. Sherman knew Hood was planning something, but he wasn't sure what. On September 29th, Hood began moving his army around Atlanta. By October 2nd, part of the army was at Powder Springs, eyeing the Western and Atlantic Railroad. Hood gathered his commanders and asked them to give speeches to their men to lift morale. One of the most famous came from Patrick Cleburne, the Stonewall of the West. Looking skyward, he declared, "If this cause that is so dear to my heart is doomed to fail, I pray heaven may let me fall with it, while my face is toward the enemy, and my arm battling for that which I know to be right." His words stirred hearts, but speeches couldn't fix the Army's dwindling strength. On October 3rd, Stewart's corps tore up 8 to 12 miles of track at Big Shanty, heating rails and twisting them into Sherman neckties, useless for repair. Hood ordered Stewart to send a division to capture the supply base at Allatoona Pass, a narrow choke point on the Western and Atlantic Railroad. Stewart chose Samuel French's division, which marched north on October 4th to destroy Sherman's depot. Meanwhile, Union Brigadier General Green B. Rom, stationed at Cartersville, Georgia, recruited an unlikely spy, the wife of a Confederate conscript who secretly sympathized with the Union. On October 2nd, she slipped into Confederate lines under the guise of visiting her husband and discovered Hood's advance toward Allatoona. She reported back, giving Sherman critical intelligence. Sherman ordered John M. Corse to reinforce Allatoona. Corse, a strict disciplinarian from Iowa, wasn't beloved by his men, but was respected as a fighter. He had taken over Thomas Sweeney's division after Sweeney's removal. Corse was at Rome, Georgia, guarding against Confederate raids, but he needed to move fast. Here's where the story takes a turn worthy of a Hollywood script. Corse needed rail transport, but the system was a mess. Derailments, delays, and reluctant engineers. Captain George W. Hill, Rom's staff officer, was dispatched to get Corse moving. Hill boarded a train at Kingston, only to find the engineer creeping along at walking speed. The engineer explained he wanted to be able to jump off if rebels attacked. Hill, unimpressed, put his hand on the man's shoulder and growled, "You run this engine as fast as possible, or I will throw you off and go on without you. You are not necessary." The train suddenly picked up speed. At Kingston, Hill commandeered 12 cars and 2 engines, cleared a derailment within an hour, and steamed into Rome with 20 cars ready. Corse initially protested. "I can't get to Allatoona. The road is torn up." Hill shot back, "No, General, the road is repaired. I just came over it." When Corse doubted him, Hill snapped, "I have control of a train for you. 20 cars, 2 engines. Load your men in 20 minutes. Corse, finally convinced, declared, If I go down there, I will pitch into them, by God, if there are 30,000. By 8:30 p.m., Corse's division was loaded and racing south. At 1 a.m., they pulled into Allatoona Depot. Corse had won the race. French's division was still miles away, exhausted from dismantling track. French's plan to attack Allatoona was already unraveling. His men had marched all night with little sleep, and coordinating two wings of his division across rugged terrain proved nearly impossible. Corse's men were entrenched and ready. General Samuel French's division moved west of Allatoona Pass, planning a neat pincer attack from the north and west. On paper, it looked clever. In reality, it was chaos. French's wings were spread too far apart with no direct contact, and coordination was a nightmare. Thinking the Union garrison was just 3 regiments, French tried diplomacy first. He sent a note demanding surrender. Union General John M. Corse scribbled back a reply dripping with defiance. "We are prepared for the needless effusion of blood whenever it is agreeable to you." Translation: "Come and get us." At 10 a.m., French ordered Francis Cockrell's Missourians and William Young's North Carolinians forward. They surged into Union skirmishers, only to be blasted by artillery and double-shotted cannon. One Union soldier remembered it as a hailstorm of bullets that tore into the Confederate ranks. Still, the rebels pressed on, bayonets flashing, sabers clashing, even hurling sticks and stones in desperate hand-to-hand combat. For a moment, the parapets of the Union fort became a medieval melee. But the Union defenders, though shaken, held. Corse himself was knocked senseless by a bullet to the head, revived only after sitting on a living corpse, one of the men pretending to be dead to avoid the fight. By midday, French's attack stalled. Reports of Union reinforcements unnerved him, and he ordered a withdrawal. The Union lost about 32% of their garrison, 142 killed, 353 wounded, 212 missing, but French's division suffered worse. 898 casualties out of 3,553 men. Hood's attempt to sever Sherman's supply chain had failed spectacularly, leaving his army weaker than before. After the bloody fiasco at Allatoona, Hood pulled his army back to Cave Spring, Georgia, near the Alabama line. On October 9th, his cavalry commander Joseph Wheeler finally rejoined after 2 months of wandering Tennessee. His cavalry was worn out, depleted, and had accomplished little. That same evening, Pierre-Gustave Toutant Beauregard arrived at Hood's headquarters. Davis had given Beauregard a vague department command stretching from Georgia to the Mississippi. In practice, Beauregard became Hood's chief of staff, trying to impose order on Hood's increasingly erratic plans. Hood told Beauregard he intended to move north again, tearing up the Western and Atlantic Railroad from Kingston to Tunnel Hill. If Sherman followed, Hood would slip into northern Alabama and make Jacksonville his supply base. Problem: Jacksonville had no railroad. The nearest line was at Blue Mountain, 12 miles away. Beauregard scrambled to organize wagon routes, couriers, and even suggested building a rail spur, but nothing materialized. Hood was planning a campaign with a supply base that couldn't supply him. By October 10th, Hood's army was on the move again. At Resaca, Stuart's corps ripped up track while Stephen D. Lee demanded the surrender of the Union garrison. The Federals refused, and Lee declined to attack entrenched positions. So Hood's men kept marching north, tearing up rails, burning ties, and twisting iron into Sherman neckties. Patrick Cleburne, one of the Confederacy's finest division commanders, marveled at the destruction. The shouting of the lifters, the ringing of pick and axe heads, the interminable line of fires, it bewildered me as I have been by the roar and sights of a great city. By October 13th, Hood's army had destroyed over 30 miles of track in northern Georgia. At Dalton, the Union garrison surrendered. Most of the troops were black, and Hood's men forced them to help rip up rails before sending them back to their enslavers or shipping them to Mississippi. Sherman wasn't idle. He knew Hood's railroad raids were meant to lure him north. Hood hoped to drag Sherman away from Atlanta, then pivot into Alabama and Tennessee, but Sherman wasn't fooled. He gave chase, keeping his army concentrated and his supply lines guarded. Hood, meanwhile, marched his men west toward Galesville, Alabama, away from Sherman's main force, a move that left his army exhausted, undersupplied, and increasingly isolated. The Tennessee campaign was less a masterstroke and more a tragic comedy of errors. Hood's army bled at Allatoona, burned itself out wrecking railroads, and stumbled westward into Alabama.